Welcome, everyone, to the Jake Dunlap Show. This is your weekly dose of real success stories from entrepreneurs, athletes, celebrities, CEOs, and the people that you love. If you've ever wondered what makes people tick, what are the weird things that happened to them in their past that help to shape the people that they've became, every Thursday at 8 a.m. Eastern, you can tune in and get exactly that. The behind the scenes, not the typical behind the scenes, but the real stories that shaped some of the people that you know, love, and follow. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jake Dunlap Show. Today's guest has seen it all. He's taken an organization from the beginnings of the founder running around, like a chicken with its head cut off. I can relate to this, doing everything, to now scaling an extremely successful business. And today, he's going to share what he's learned around change management, removing yourself from the equation, and we're going to talk about risk, which I think for a lot of people is either scary or sometimes, you're out there taking reckless risks, especially in an economy like today. So ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Mr. Patrick Danial. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So you and I were catching up right before, just talking a little bit about, some of the evolution, some of your big takeaways and learnings. And today I want to focus on that transition. Because I think every company or most people that start a company, they want to get to that point, right? They're like, I don't want to be the guy or the woman doing everything. But sometimes it can feel like you have to. It's been 10 years since I started my company. I could definitely relate to the conversation we were having around, you've got to do all these things. And then it also feels like you've got so much institutional knowledge that you're like, well, I'm the only one who can do this, or, I have extra color, so I can do it this way. So why don't you tell the audience just a little bit about, I guess a couple of key points for you, as you were scaling the company, maybe just talk a little bit about, letting go. And was there a point or points where you kind of knew it was time, or maybe some starts and stops? That's how I feel like with me it was like, oh, I can let go. Oh, no, I can't. Oh, I can let go. No, I can't. So I'd love to hear from you a little bit about like that transition and how you made that and some of the learnings along the way.
Yeah, looking back there, it's easier to identify the peaks and the troughs
always.
In the rearview mirror. And we were pretty lucky, I think, with the timing of getting into our business. I'm one of two co-founders. And we started in 98, 99. We were respectively 18 and 19 years old, and transitioning through the dot-com boom. We had little to no responsibilities, no families, no children, debt, mortgages, all of these things. And so risk back then was a very different.
It's a little different.
And we didn't have the burden and weight of the world on us as you begin to bring on through other life experiences. So we were able to dive in very quickly, but what we realized and would continue to bump up against for probably the first 10 years until we embraced the transitions we had to go through was that we couldn't do everything ourselves. And sure, in the beginning, your goal is often a balance between trying to make money and then trying to hone in on something you're really good at that's special and different that you can then take and scale up. And that took a really long time for us. We had employees come and go. We very much attempted to always grab the wheel and fix a situation ourselves, because in the moment when you can become a prisoner, you just want to solve and push through it. And that very quickly changes if you're looking to move beyond a lifestyle business and not be held captive to every single facet of the business, every customer, and every employee need. And so, the first big transition for us was probably in 2010, around there, when we had our first business coach that we brought on. And I'll never forget the story of sitting in a Starbucks with my business partner. First meeting, he's kind of feeling out whether, the best business coaches self-select who they're going to work with.
Right.
They want not just motivation, but they want people that are going to commit, have a good idea, have some good culture, and they want to work with great companies just as we do today. And so I remember sitting and being asked, "What's the vision of the company? What are your values? Where are you looking to take this thing? What are your personal goals?" And we probably spent a half an hour just waffling and running around in circles and giving completely different answers than one another because we were so compressed in the moment and we couldn't answer. So it was the first time we had to take a step back and take a breath and say, it's okay from what's happening right now to begin to create some alignment and some focus on what it is we actually want to be, because we can't do everything at once. And that was probably the first time that we were able to put some guardrails on things, and it very quickly allowed us to bring folks on and give them some clarity and vision to get them excited about moving forward. But to your point about letting go, I think after that moment, we continued to grow, but we went through another iteration of still very much being a founder-led company up until about 5 years ago, where we learned about the power of numbers and allowing people to contribute ideas and vote on ideas in a safe space, and that none of us are smarter than all of us. And we used a method that was borrowed from agile computing, where we would break down strategy and ideas into small. Actually, it starts at the individual level, where someone makes a list of everything they think we need to solve for, a direction we need to go, depending on the exercise we're performing. And then that iterates up through the table and then up through the entire organization. And then everyone has a safe space to debate, but then we all go up and we vote. And my vote is the same as anyone that started 2 weeks ago or has been with us for 10 years. And that process, that was another system that we used that's called Rapid Enterprise Development from the Red Strategy Group. We had a wonderful consultant who ironically became the president of our company 3 years later. He was able to be there and dig in and see all the hair on the business and all the issues, that no one sees from the outside. They just see the growth in numbers and revenue. But it really allowed us to both create alignment in the business by having everyone contribute to who we are and where we're going. And then it took us stepping back and doing what's called crowning the company to allow them to take ownership. Because you can't extend autonomy to someone until you make them feel that we're all moving in the same direction. And then you can step back and give them the motivation to push forward and take their own risks. And knowing that when they commit to something and do it, it may very well not work out. Most of the time it doesn't, but they're going to have support and people there for them to continue forward.
Yeah, this is interesting, man. I think it's the thought of, again, letting the people guide the strategy. How I have to imagine like there were conversations around that, right? Of, well, look, these, they don't really understand maybe like the big picture or the macro, what things that are happening. It's very interesting. It's like I've consistently found like people know what's going on. People can see the business. They see what's broke, even if it's not even in their own department. But I could also see that being very hard. Or maybe not. Like I guess I'm just kind of visualizing this for myself, but maybe talk a little bit about that process, of making that switch and then maybe sticking with it in times when, I don't know, I'm sure there's times when you probably thought like, oh, we should probably be doing this or maybe not. But how did you kind of implement that and make sure that it stuck? Because I could just see a lot of different ways that it could go where it, might be harder to make it stick or deviate from time to time.
It was terrifying. I remember knowing that we were stepping into this. We did a 3-day workshop and we brought about 80 of our leaders and department heads to a hotel. We just basically locked ourselves in this place for 3 straight days. And my business partner and I heading in, we're thinking, are we really going to just let it fly and let everybody throw things on the wall? And what happens, initially, not having done it before, is first you air all the grievances, you get all that what are normally symptoms that have deeper rooted problems. That's a much shorter list of things that actually need addressing that just then manifest for people in different ways. And so it was very therapeutic at first, but then we really got to work and we got everything on the wall. Everyone was like, wow, I spoke up and said this, and no one, snapped at me or got upset.
Right.
We really just moved in a great direction. And you're right. People are aware, and you don't know that they're aware when you run an organization in fear because they're not going to speak up. And, the days of needing to be smart in the moment and impress and solve the problem were long gone for us. And it takes time to realize that every time you speak, there's that old adage they give you in school and for younger folks when they're joining the workforce of, don't speak just to say something in a meeting. Try to, come up with a +1 to the conversation. Like, what can I say and add on to that? But when you do that as a leader, after someone that works for you or on your team has spoken, you're immediately taking the wind out of their sails by saying, I've just repeated back something you've left off of what you've said. And so, this whole process was about allowing people to speak and not needing to steer as much or tell them what was right or wrong. And we moved from, the macro level of market segmentation exercises to customer filters. We were taking business anywhere we could get it, but all we had to do was step back and say, look at the customers we have now. Look at the patterns about the ones that we perform the best work for, that we continue to grow with. Why do we continue to go after these other types of customers? There's a different business for that. They need a different solution. That's not us. And that was probably one of the biggest learnings that came from all of us, because the team is doing the work. They're working with the customers. They're trying to build relationships. And they said, why don't we just move up market, which happened to be our segment? And yes, the sales cycle is longer, but we have got to hold to more rigorous filters, and we have to have non-negotiables with our customers. And when you force that, they appreciate it because they see company in the other brands we work with that are very similar to them, and it just raises confidence all around. And that was something that came out of the organization that was a very tough pill to swallow, because as an entrepreneur, you want to make it work with anyone. You want to take anyone on. You convince yourself that the company can meet that one filter they missed by working with us and growing, and you just end up justifying running in every direction. So that was a great macro lesson, I think, that came out of it that allowed us to really focus and say, we're just going to focus on enterprise customers. It's how we're set up. We get more integrated, and we de-risk, which is super attractive to brands, larger brands. And we're just not a down market company right now. So put that aside and let's run in this direction.
Yeah, I'm smiling because we did a very similar exercise, and I think very recently, here in the last few weeks actually, and we're kind of at the tail end of it, and especially I think an economy like now, it can be a more maybe even a more difficult time to do that, but it's also the time to do it. When you think about what happens, and you've been operating the business for since the late 90s, so you get this. It's all cycles, right? So we go through these downs and then ups and then downs and ups. And I can tell you just what I've seen is that the more you tighten, understand who you are in times like this, the more hay you make whenever the economy comes around, because you have a clear identity, you've got a clear message, people know who you are, the team is motivated, like you said. And so anyone who's listening right now, you might be like, that sounds terrifying. It's a bad economy. Should I do it? My advice would be, go look at the numbers. Go pull your product lines, go pull the data from what worked, what wasn't working. And what I try to do is look through this lens. There's a great book called Built to Sell. And it talks about, it's like, what's repeatable in what you're doing, and start to look for those things where you actually have a differentiator or proprietary process or can develop one. And, I challenge my team. There's a part of our business, about 15% of our business, and you can probably relate to, Patrick, where I gave the team a deadline. I said, we've got 4 weeks. If we can't make this 15%, these types of projects repeatable and simple, we're done. We're not doing them anymore. because they disrupt. To your point, they disrupt, and the people have called it out. They're like, Jake, these types of projects, blah blah blah, even though they're responsible for a big chunk of revenue. So I know it can be scary, and let's talk about scary. Let's talk about risk. One of the things you mentioned was empowering your employees to take risks, and obviously as a business, it was definitely a risk for you to make this move to where you're empowering your people to set to somewhat extent set some of the strategic vision and guideline and what you're going to focus on. How do you judge risk and knowing when to take risk? And obviously hindsight's 2020, but how do you think about risk in the organization and then bringing the right type of risk mindset to the people on the front line?
Sure. It's a balance, and it certainly gets, you have more tools in the chest when you have a bit more experience behind you. But then that can also cloud your vision when you think you've figured out something before, and it can soften moves. But the larger an organization gets, the less prone they are to wanting to take risk, because you're particularly in times right now with economic constraints and stress that are on really everyone. You have to consider what patterns exist, again, in what you've been doing that you can accelerate across the portfolio. So, instead of just looking at maybe racing to bring new business on, I think it's important to go back to the knowledge transfer around what's working in pockets for customers that we haven't dusted off and thought about as a play that can scale in the existing portfolio.
Do you have an example of that? Like maybe even your own products of how you saw those?
We're a unique company in that we're a managed service, and we have an in-house team of engineers. We build a lot of our own custom software that we use on behalf of our customers. And then we have a delivery side of our business. And so there's combinations of more consistent delivery of our methodology, and then continuing to iterate on our software product to find either new efficiencies or, more importantly, how to extend more customer value out. And most recently, we had a wonderful internal discovery with a customer where they brought to us another channel of marketing that could leverage what we were producing for them. So this is existing value to unlock within a business. And we worked with the customer to identify ways of continuing to scale this with them and validate it, and then make the decision to begin to take this to the other customers in our portfolio. And I think the risk here is that we're asking ourselves to step out of our core competency of the channel that we thrive in the most, and have discussions with new departments and teams at an organization. But the confidence in doing that comes from two areas. One, it's rooted in what we're better than anyone else at, that allowed us to create an asset for them to leverage elsewhere. And two, we're an extremely performance-based, outcome-focused business. And so as long as we have the same conversation with this new department around the outcomes we're driving, we shouldn't get pulled into the mud of, this is outside your territory, this is a different channel, because the reality is we're working with the same audiences they care about, and we're trying to drive the same outcomes. And we've found something that can be repurposed, that exists, that's an owned asset of this business that we've developed. And what a better time right now with all the constraints and pressures on companies than to find value that exists in something you're already doing. And it's it's a scary thing, because with these large organizations, when you go in, you're proposing something often to a team that has previously had ownership of this. And you often get this not invented here syndrome, where there's an immediate rejection of an outsider to come in. And so it has to be an extremely collaborative process. It has to be not just driving new outcomes through the external vendor, but it's got to be adding value to what they're already doing. And so, that was a recent discovery that we've been stepping through. And, I think it's been testing our ability to get outside our comfort zone, talk to new stakeholders on the customer side. But by keeping the conversation on the front end and the back end, the inputs and the outputs, in the same language of how, the higher up the organization you go, the more the outcomes matter. If you just keep that consistent language and that literacy in place, you can have conversations with different groups in an organization.
Yeah, and I can imagine that, especially going through it the first times. If you didn't win the first deal or second deal, it also is like, maybe for the internal team is like, should we be doing this, or should we go back to what we were doing? And how did you stay the course? Because I'm sure there were some bumps along the way as you all made this, and probably some conversations where people are like, hey, why don't we go back and do what we were doing? How did you rally the troops, let's say, when there was maybe some nerves around going back, which usually happens in some type of change initiatives?
Yes. And it's not even just their perception of the risk to the organization. It's their perception to, are we becoming a different company? Is my role being threatened? Are there new skill sets that I need to go adapt? And again, right now with the turnovers, particularly in tech and people moving around, it's very natural to be protective of your space. And so, no one wants to stand still, but everyone's afraid of change. Right. And I think we've managed it by limiting the number of things we do to as little as possible. I mean, if you can only focus on changing one thing at a time, you're going to take a lot of anxiety out of the organization. And, again, we go back to the methods that allowed us to get to where we are and have our teams, iterating through how they can continue to add value to this new product that is just kind of one step removed from what we were doing previously, but asking ourselves, is it tied to what we do different than everyone else? Or is this a service appendage to just go for another revenue grab? And if it's not, we don't take it.
Right.
So it's focus, and it's limiting, your changes to one vector at a time, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think also by having the team be a part of the process, it can make, the lows a little bit low, higher, because again, they feel like they're a part of it. It's like, I'm not having to convince this person, we all kind of were in this together, that we were part of the decision making. And so I think that can also make it easier, where it's like, hey, we talked about the pros and cons, we talked about this is the path forward. And I think that's something any leader who's listening right now can learn from, which is, with a lot of these changes, and whether they're simplifying the product line, focusing on what we're best in class at, making other organizational change, making sure that your team, and this is my kind of takeaway, your team is a part of deciding the risk that we're going to take to some extent, can make the process much easier. So I think there's a ton of really, really impactful insights here, Patrick, for any leader, whether you're leading a department, a team, an organization, in terms of how to think about change. Parting thoughts from you. So one key takeaway, if you were a new leader starting out today, knowing what you know, what is the one thing that you wish somebody would have told you?
I think it's during those transitions, the blind spot was not being able to take what I knew were my strengths and invert them to see what my weaknesses would be in moments of crisis. All of the reactive moments and the things I did because I thought it was what I was best at was actually the opposite and harmed the organization. And it's taking a step back and allowing everyone to contribute and iterate on a path forward that would have sped up and accelerated those transitions and made them much smoother for us. So I think you're blinded by what you're good at, and that's the lens into where you need to improve.
Or what you think, or I would add to it, you're also blinded by things that you think you're serviceable at, where you're like, I'm pretty good at that. And you're like, no, like this person's best in class, and that's what it looks like. And then I know that's been the learning for me from time to time in different parts.
There tend to be some egos in the mix too with
you don't know it. Sometimes it's subconscious too. So you're like, I don't know.
That's right.
But I love the idea again. And I think a lot of it, another theme in here is just the carving out the time to reflect. You're going through a change period. Take the time. What are we going to need in that next? Am I that person? Hey, it's okay. It's not ego. It's not, you're not a bad person because you're not that person. And taking the time to think about where's this business going to go. And for any leader out there, taking the time on a weekly basis or monthly or quarterly to where you truly have time to go deep and think about the future is one of the most critical things you can do. So thank you so much, Patrick, for all of your wisdom. I really, really appreciate you joining. I'm going to link to some of the different resources that you mentioned as well, too, this rapid enterprise development. I'm kind of interested in checking that out myself. But thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it, man.
Excellent. Thanks, Jake. This was fun.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank everybody for listening, and we will see you all in the next one. Thank you, everyone, again for listening to another episode. If you are listening all the way to the end, I hope you have left a review. I hope that you make sure that you're following or subscribing on your favorite podcast listening apparatus. We'll be back next Thursday. And again, make sure to check out the Monday episodes as well, too. A lot of people are really enjoying these kind of mini episode Mondays. So make sure to tune in, subscribe, and leave a review.